During the terrible massacre of World War I, over 1 million people were deported to Auschwitz-Birkenau. The SS murdered the majority of them in the gas chambers. The movie begins with a dark monotone inside the German concentration camps where an exhausted prisoner is attempting to escape. A German guard notices him and attempts to shoot but changes his mind, simply watching him instead. Another guard who had seen the prisoner rushes over to him and immediately shoots him, yelling at the other man for not doing his job. 8 months before liberation, a car is approaching holding an unknown man in the back seat. Once the vehicle stops, the man leaves the car with his cane and walks away. The scene changes and we are taken to a field where a few young children are surrounding their teacher who is lecturing them about Hitler's beliefs. He explains to them that the future of the country depends on them and urges them to make a promise to always do their duty in the Hitler Youth. Once they're done, the teacher heads over to the young boy sitting away from them and tells him not to be afraid of their leader as he is their friend. The teacher then hands the boy a uniform and tells him that he can return it if he doesn't like it next week and explains to him that he would look good in them. The scene changes once more and we see Hans out in the fields working on his painting. Later, Hans takes a picture in front of his university to show that he has graduated. He then has dinner with his father and younger sister who want to celebrate his achievement. During the dinner, Hans's father expresses how proud he is of his son and expresses that although he doesn't agree with everything Hitler says, he is proud of his son. This comment aggravates Hans and he immediately defends his leader, telling his father about the Hitler Youth rally that had made everyone emotional. When Hans expresses his dedication to Hitler to the point where he would give his life for their leader, Hans's mother angrily tells the men that they shouldn't discuss such things during dinner. She chastises them for taking focus away from the main point of their celebration. Agreeing with his wife, Hans's father picks up his drink and appreciates Hans's new architecture degree. In a different household that seemed like they had fallen on hard times, Samuel and his wife Elena are having dinner, dreaming about the chicken soup they had once enjoyed. Elena is hopeful that they will soon be evacuated and taken someplace where they'll be able to have plenty of food. Although Samuel wants to be optimistic about the subject, he doesn't want to trust the Nazis after how they have treated them. Elena cannot wait to start a family with Samuel, but he is fearful of bringing children into the life they're living. He tells her although everything they own had been taken from them, the soldiers could never take their souls, adamant about not feeling like a victim. Samuel tells his wife that the time of their salvation isn't far, but that they need to be patient a little while longer. Holding Elena's hand, Samuel promises to love and protect her with his last breath. Back in Hans's household, his mother suggests that their son build them a new house and a playground for his younger sister, which he gladly accepts. A few days later, Hans is in his room about to change into his Hitler Youth uniform, while thousands of Jews are being transported to the dreadful concentration camps. Amongst the passengers were Samuel and Elena, who had wrongly assumed they were going to be saved. When the train finally stops, the passengers head out and see German soldiers waiting for them with guns and dogs, telling them that they would be reuniting with their family soon. They separate the men and women into groups. They are then told to pile up all their shoes and given new clothes, showing them their new accommodations which were barely livable. Once they are taken to the large hall where their beds are made, they are given clothes to change into. Meanwhile, Hans changes into his uniform and approaches two high-ranking officers named Klaus and Franz. Although Klaus doesn't think much of Hans, Franz expresses his appreciation of the man and asks Hans to show them his drawings. Pulling out the papers from his pocket, Hans hands them to Klaus, who is immediately impressed by what he has seen. The intense Klaus gets up from his seat and pours Hans a drink, who reluctantly accepts. Klaus then asks Hans if he is satisfied with his new post, but Hans mentions, although he is happy, he believes he could contribute more, expressing his desire to transfer to the front. Declining the transfer, Klaus tells Hans that he has another job for him that had come straight from the top, and the group raises their glasses to it. Klaus then takes Hans to the concentration camp to see the prisoners and abuses them in front of Hans, showing that he has no sympathy for the poor souls there. Feeling sorry for Elena, whom Klaus had slapped, Hans leaves her his handkerchief on the floor. Outside, Klaus orders Hans to build him a large facility where they could keep more Jews that would soon be arriving. Hans is told that he will be given everything he needs for the task, and the cruel Klaus gives him the advice to use the fat prisoners for work, mentioning that the thin ones are only good for target practice. On their way back, Klaus sees the handkerchief Hans had dropped and assumes one of the prisoners had stolen it. When the cruel man attempts to hit one of the women standing in front of him, Hans quickly stops him, telling him that he must have accidentally dropped it. Disgusted by the prisoners, Klaus pulls out his gun and shoots two of the women. As they head out, Hans feels guilty about what he has done and tries to remember the number of Elena's shirt. Later, Hans is sitting with his colleagues who show him a bag of diamonds he had taken from one of the prisoners, concealing it by continuously swallowing it. As the two men drink to the health of their leader, Hans is sitting in the corner, disturbed by what he has seen. They then mention Hans's new friendship with Klaus and discuss his new project, which was supposed to be a gas chamber. Hans is disgusted by what he has heard and regrets what he is forced to do. Once Hans completes his design, he shows it to Klaus, who admires his work and tells him he needs to overlook the construction. He also explains that he must choose his workforce carefully and that they must be shot immediately after the completion of the project. That day, Hans goes to the registry and looks up Elena's number, finding out her real name. When he is alone at night, Hans struggles with the guilt of what he has to do and almost tears the design he had made of the chamber, but holds himself back, fearful for his life and his family. The following morning, Hans gathers all the workforce he needs in one of the rooms to explain what he needs from them. Amongst the group was Elena, who was confused as to why she had been put in the group, as she was only a seamstress. Hans explains to everyone that they were chosen for their abilities and that they all served a certain purpose. A few weeks after the construction had started, Elena barges into Hans's office and angrily tells him that they are unable to work when they are being abused. Two men swiftly enter the room, carrying Hans's lead engineer, who has been severely battered by the guard seconds earlier. While Hans is taking care of the man, Klaus arrives, and disgusted by Hans's kindness, he shoots the engineer in the head. To see his loyalty, Klaus gives Hans a gun and forces him to shoot one of the women, which he regretfully follows through. That night, while sitting outside, Hans is filled with dread about what he has done and contemplates ending his life, but he stops himself. The following day, Hans goes to his office and begins a new design for a museum. While he worked, Elena hovered around him and complimented his work, asking him what it was, and he explained his vision to her. Although Hans emphasizes Elena and her people, he knows he is unable to do anything, as it would be punishable by death. Hans begins to confess the dread he feels about everything that was happening to the Jews, but Elena refuses to empathize with him, telling him their situation was much worse. Elena also tells him that she doesn't believe what they are telling them about the sanitation room, telling him that she knows they are planning a massacre. When Hans assures Elena that he cares about her and what happens to her people, Elena begs him to save one of her friends who was being tortured, but he tells her that there was nothing he could do, ordering her to get back to work. That night, Elena comes to Hans's office and asks him about the hanging Jew she had asked him to save. He tells her that he had saved the man from torture, but that he couldn't save his life. After she thanks him for his kindness, Elena reveals that she had been pregnant ever since she had come to the camp, hiding her pump as much as she could. She tells him that it has gotten much harder to hide her pregnancy and begs him for help. Touched by her story, Hans decides to help her, telling her that they need to give this new life a chance. During their conversation, Klaus barges into the room, demanding that the construction speed be increased. Quickly adjusting himself, Hans tells Klaus that he would need more men. Although Klaus agrees, he refuses to give him any more women, allowing Hans to keep Elena. Once Klaus leaves, Hans asks Elena for her husband's name and begins to search for him. 3 months later, Hans manages to connect Elena and her husband Samuel, telling her that her husband was one of the men who refused orders and he was to be executed in the newly constructed gas chamber. In the living area, Elena is fearful as she was close to giving birth. The women around her have prepared everything and are doing their best to conceal the birth of a new Jew child. In the office, Hans is being congratulated by Klaus for a job well done on the new gas chambers. Klaus suggests that the Jews who had labored over the construction of the chamber should be the first to try it, and Hans pretends to happily agree. As soon as Klaus leaves, Elena's water breaks and it is time for her to give birth. Laying her down, Hans calls one of the women who help her deliver the child. After several hours of struggle, Elena manages to give birth to a son. That night, while Elena is passed out from exhaustion, Hans attempts to take care of the baby who refuses to stop crying. Suddenly, Franz, Hans's father, walks inside and demands an explanation, to which Hans tells him that he is unable to kill a mother and child without remorse. Understanding his son's frustration, Franz helps him with the child and tells his son that he had never wanted this for him, but he couldn't allow him to be killed on the front lines, which was why he had suggested his son for the position. Suddenly, we see a brief flashback of Franz and Hans fishing by the lake near the house while they discuss Hitler's dream, which Hans believed in wholeheartedly at the time. Although Franz had tried to explain to his son that the path he was trying to take was a wrong one, Hans remained adamant, which was when Franz had the idea to suggest his son for the architecture position he now occupied. When Hans agrees to the position, Franz suggests that they keep their relationship a secret so he is not accused of favoritism. One afternoon, Klaus receives a phone call informing him that they need to escalate the process. That night, a drunken Klaus comes over to Hans's office where Elena is quietly hiding and gives him a can of gas chemical they would be using on the prisoners. A few minutes later, Franz arrives and tells them that with the Russians arriving fast, Hitler's demands had become more and more erratic. When Elena sees the gas in Hans's hands, she asks him why they had given it to him, and he explains the sad truth that he was to be the executioner. Devastated by what was to happen, Elena decides to end her life and the life of her son rather than go through the torment. That day, hundreds of Jews were placed in the gas chamber along with Elena and her newborn. Although he is devastated by what he has to do, Hans opens up the chamber and spills the content of the chemical inside before sending hundreds hundreds to their death. On Liberation Day, Klaus and Franz are standing in their office when they receive the news. While Klaus is preparing the cyanide tablets, Franz takes out his gun and shoots Klaus in the head. Accepting his fate, Franz then takes the poison tablet and swallows it. Years later, an elderly Hans is remembering Elena and all the lives he had cost with what he had built, while he artfully sketches them while he lives in his small cell.
And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our video. Watch the next recaps on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.